All right. So I'm screen sharing with you guys right now. Can you give me a verbal yes that you can see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, guys. So I just want to keep this to 30 minutes right now. And I just want to remind you folks that are here, a lot of you already saw this today, that we're working off of this modified rubric. It has all of the same basic information. It's just spread out across a few different points. But basically, all of the tasks are the same. We talked about this today during the live stream. And so if you go back on YouTube and watch my video from today, May 4th, I broke down this entire DBQ rubric and how to get those points. If you missed it, frankly, guys, you don't have to really change anything. Just write the DBQ you know how to do, and you're going to do just fine. If you want any one-on-one on that or have any questions, let me know, and I'm happy to do that for you again. So cool. All right. So on Google Classroom, guys, I attached this file right here, which is like 30 some pages. So I want you to open it up, and it is the progressive era DBQ, and this is called like the student responses form or the sample responses or the student commentary. So go ahead and open that up. And when you do, it looks like this. Cool. So what you have in here, folks, is the analysis of all the documents. It's got a list of acceptable thesis statements and unacceptable thesis statements, same with context, and it's got 3 different student essays. One of them's a 7, perfect DBQ. The other one's a 5, still a really good one, and the other one's a 2, a little bit less good. So we'll look at 1 or 2 of those tonight, and we'll just kind of basically go through this DBQ. If you didn't do the practice one, no problem. Here's what the prompt was. Evaluate the extent to which the progressive movement fostered political change in the United States. Now, guys, the rubric that we're working with now is slightly different. They've modified it for 2020, so don't worry about what these points say. Just kind of remember what we've talked about with DBQs as your bread and butter. So let's kind of scroll down real quick right here and see what they did. Let's go down to document number, well, I guess we can see that's just an explanation of the rubric. Let's just go down to page number, what are we at? We're at 5 right here. So starting on page 5, guys, and we're obviously not going to read every single word of this document. I'm just trying to help you navigate it right now so you can kind of help yourself with this too, because we're only doing this for 30 minutes. So starting on page 5, that's when they have the description of all of the documents. And then they talk about the sourcing information, meaning the purpose or the author's point of view or the intended audience or the historical context. So that's what these 2 columns are. The column on the left just is a really simple summary of what the document is. And the column on the right is a little bit more in-depth explanation of the situation. That's what they call that, or the point of view or the context or anything like that. So you have that first one, Jane Addams. Most of you guys remember social settlements. So that's what that one is about. And it's also about political machines and reforming political machines. And essentially, so it's actually less, that document, guys, is less about social settlements. A lot of us got kind of tricked. We saw, oh, Jane Addams' Whole House, and we think social settlements. And remember, she is the social settlement lady, but that source itself was about political campaigns and machines and essentially trying to reform corrupt political elections where all of the jobs are just given out like with patronage as rewards for your votes. Tammany Hall is the example of that. So it's critiquing political machines. Down here, number 2, this is Teddy Roosevelt talking about how certain corporations need to be regulated or busted up. And they give all of the different perspectives on that. Down below here, guys, we have someone talking about juvenile court and how juveniles need to be treated as children offenders, not as adult offenders. That's a pretty modern way of thinking about it. Over here, we have a source about recall and referendum. That's really important that you guys know what recall and referendum are. If you get a crappy politician elected, wouldn't you like to recall him before his term is over? That's what that is. That gives the voters the ability to recall someone from office that's elected before their term's up. The referendum is when the voters can get something added to a bill. Get added to a ballot to be voted on just by getting signatures. When you see people collecting signatures for something, they're oftentimes trying to collect signatures for a referendum to allow the citizens to vote on an issue. Doesn't matter if it's a simple thing like a park or something really important. Recall and referendum are how you take power out of the hands of the elite and put it in the hands of the people. That's a progressive reform. So that's what that one's talking about. Advocates for popular participation in government. Down here, we have one from the NAACP talking about how black people are essentially left out of the progressive reforms. Remember, we have that Plessy-Ferguson decision, and Woodrow Wilson, even though he's a progressive, still segregates. He actually resegregates the United States government. It had been desegregated all throughout Reconstruction. He resegregates it. Not necessarily a good dude. We have one talking about efficient police forces and how to make how to make technology essential. How should I phrase that? How to make government agencies more efficient is what that one's all talking about. And then finally down here, it's about prohibition. A lot of people think that, oh man, progressive, it's all about, getting safer working conditions and shorter working hours for laborers and factories. And that's true, but it's also, guys, about this idea about banning alcohol. That's a very progressive idea as well. So that's just a really brief description of what the documents are. Hopefully, if you did those, all of those are making sense to you. And if you had any questions on them, hopefully these can answer them. Sorry, I got to sneeze. Excuse me. So now that we look at the documents real quick, guys, let's just see what a couple examples of acceptable thesis statements are. I like the most number 1 right here. And also I like number 3. I'll let you read, 2 and 4 if you want, but I'm just going to read 1 and 3 for you because I like these thesis statements. If you wrote your own thesis statement for this one, see how it compares. Here's the first one. The progressive movement was incredibly successful in fostering political change, such as trust-busting large monopolies and reforming the criminal justice system for youth and adults. However, their failure to advance African-American civil rights sufficiently left a significant scar on their legacy, as many issues of discrimination such as segregation and Jim Crow are prolonged. Remember what you're doing in a thesis, guys. You're making a claim that's defensible. This claim can be defended. They're saying it's incredibly successful, and they've given categories that they're going to talk about later. They know that the documents, guys, are going to allow them to talk about trust busting, and they also know the documents are going to allow them to talk about reforming the criminal justice system for youth and adults. That's why it's really important that you guys spend like the first 10 minutes looking at the documents real quick, because by looking at the documents, it'll probably help you understand what your thesis needs to be. So just right off the bat, they made a defensible claim. It's incredibly successful. And here are 2 categories they've set up: trust busting, reforming the criminal justice system. And they also have kind of left themselves a nuance to their argument. They're saying even though it's incredibly successful in these areas, it's a failure in this area for African Americans. And they know that NAACP source is going to back that up. They know they also have evidence beyond the documents, like the Plessy v. Ferguson decision or Jim Crow segregation. I think that's an awesome thesis. Let's look at the next one that I also really like, which is right here. While the progressive movement achieved goals in the improvement of cities and the protection of children, the movement ultimately failed in increasing democracy due to the fact that the democratic rights were not extended to African Americans. Guys, you see how that's a really good thesis? It's just not as wordy as that top one. This top one is way wordier. There's probably not as many of you who will write that first one, just simply because it's a much higher level thesis statement. It's more complex. It has more vocabulary. Down here, it says a very similar thing, but just in more simple language. So I'm trying to help you see you don't have to be like a professional writer and use like every single vocab term to get it. One gets it. All of these get it. I like 1 and 3 the most. So these are just a couple examples of good ones. Here's unacceptable ones. These ones are too general. And these are not even that bad, guys, but they're just too general. Here's an unacceptable. The progressive movement caused political change to a large extent because it influenced so many different areas of politics that were able to change at the time. They're just saying that's a restatement of the prompt. Let's look at the prompt again for those of you that forgot. It is... evaluate the extent to which progressive movement fostered political change. Okay, how much change did they foster? The extent to which. They're saying that this thesis statement just essentially restates it. Caused political change to a large extent because it influenced them. They're just saying it's too general. You got to be a little bit more specific. Political, social, and economic change occurred during the progressive era. Okay, they say there's no line of reasoning there. And during the time of the period of 1890 and 1820, the progressive movement fostered political change in the United States as new ideas were being spread and as a result of new policies being instituted. See, this is actually interesting, guys. Even though that one's very vague, I personally, if I was grading it, I would have awarded that. So I think it's good that they leave us out here, this one, because I'm not perfect. I can't read their minds. This one, to me, I don't think is perfect, but I would have given that a point still. So it's interesting to see that they don't. During the time of 1890 to 1920, the progressive movement fostered political change in the United States. I guess they don't say how much, to what extent. Because remember, that's a measure. That's what they ask in the prompt, is you have to say to what extent. So I guess that's why this one doesn't work. But anyhow, let's go down for context. If you remember setting the stage, guys, for the progressive reform, you should probably be talking about expansion of industrialization. You should probably be talking about the growth of cities. You should probably be talking about large-scale immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe, consolidation of trusts, and, government policies really supporting that kind of free market economy. These are the different things you should have used for your context. I don't know what you personally did, but did you mention something like that, guys? And again, typically 2 sentences is going to be enough. You need to just you need to write more than just the one phrase, though, guys. Just saying, "Oh, cities are growing." That's not going to work. You need to help me understand why they're growing. Oh, cities are growing because of the large availability of unskilled labor due to industrialization. That's how you get it. Cities are growing. That's not enough. You got to tell me a little bit more why cities are growing for context. So here's good ones for that. Let's read what they said were acceptable. The mid-19th century was a booming time for urbanization, immigration, and industrialization. The towns and cities started moving skyward. People from Europe came to America in hopes of achieving the American dream, and industries such as steel and textiles were booming in the wake of a new workforce. The amount and quality of work in America began to highlight deficiencies in America beyond the workforce. The progressive movement began to respond to this. That's a really good one. It's pretty wordy. Let's read one down below. At the time of 1890, the Gilded Age had been going on for approximately 20 years. The Gilded Age was a time when large corporations and robber barons came to power. Trusts such as John D. Rockefeller or Standard Oil were in power, and they had monopolies, snuffing out smaller competition. Under the guise of social Darwinism, a principle saying only the strong survive in the business world. This leads to the progressive movement. All those are fine. It's not how I would word stuff, but hopefully those are helpful for you guys. Let's keep on going. Here's the unacceptable ones. These are more of just like bullet point lists, guys. You'll see that these are much worse than the ones above it. In the 1890 census of 1890 concludes there is no more American frontier. McKinley is finishing the Spanish-American War when he gets shot and passes the presidency off to Theodore Roosevelt, who helps the country with progressivism. Guys, your thesis and your context should kind of go hand in hand. If you're going to make a claim about the progressive needing to reform a city based on industrial impacts, you should probably include that in the context. So try to connect your context and your thesis. I think we should start reading some essays. Let's do that. Let's scroll down, guys. We can keep going through this document, but I'm starting to lose a few of you. I think I'm losing myself. So let's scroll down all the way down to, let's read this really good one. This is on page number 17. So hopefully you're with me, guys, and we're going to read this good one, and then we'll read a less good one. So again, guys, this video is not meant to be a full 100% breakdown of all of those words up there. I just was trying to show you how to use this tool. This document, if you were to go through all 30 pages of it, it gives a lot of information on all these different sources, what works and what doesn't work. So now that you kind of know how to use it, let's read a couple examples here. I'm telling you, this first one is a perfect score. The era prior to the progressive era was characterized by laissez-faire policies and an overall lack of involvement by both the federal and state governments. This created agitation and unrest since many Americans were harmed by big business and taken advantage of due to the lack of regulations. So far, so good, guys. They're helping me understand that business is growing and the government's not really involved in regulating it. Railroads were dominated by Cornelius Vanderbilt and riddled with corruption in the form of rebates, trusts, monopolies, etc. The same can be said of other corporations, other captains of industry, robber barons, John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie. Due to the shrewd politics of the Gilded Age, the progressive era, which lasted, and that's their context ends, guys. It ends right there at Carnegie. I actually don't even think they need the last sentence. That includes, Cornelius Vanderbilt, riddled with corruption. I think that adds to it. I honestly, though, guys, don't think they need that very last sentence for their context to be acceptable. It certainly makes it better, but this is remember, a perfect essay. So just trying to help you out there. Okay, let's start with they have their context. Now let's read their thesis. Due to the shrewd politics of the Gilded Age, the Progressive Era, which lasted from the 1890s through 1920, seemed to foster major political change because it increased the power and influence of the federal government, as well as further democratized state governments. Economically, changes include government political involvement in business. That would be like trust busting. Social change includes political government involvement in temperance, abolition, and food. I can buy that, folks. Let's read it one more time. The Progressive Era seemed to foster major political change because it increased. So here's the claim. It seemed to foster major political change. And here's why. Here's the line of reasoning. Guys, so remember, you've got to make a claim and then provide your line of reasoning. Why is this happening? It fosters major political change because it increased the power and influence of the federal government, as well as further democratize state governments. They know that the documents, guys, that they have are going to allow them to prove that that statement is true. So I like that. Let's see what they got. Remember that first document was about Jane Addams. And let's remind ourselves what the second. Oh, the second one was about trust busting with Teddy Roosevelt. So anyhow, let's keep going down. Due to the lack of business regulation, people began to get agitated by the lack of government protection, which politically led to many reforms by the government, both federal and state. Now they need to prove that. For instance, Theodore Roosevelt, under his Square Deal, advocated for trust busting, which he successfully performed. That he cited document 2. He busted major railroad trusts. He believed in the concept of good and bad trust, which began the thought politically that trust can be determined to the general. That trust can be detrimental to the general public. He hoped to reduce the corruption occurring in business. So did William Taft, who continued the legacy of busting trusts. Woodrow Wilson went further and created the Clayton Antitrust Act. That's going to be their evidence beyond the documents, guys. There is nothing in these documents about the Clayton Antitrust Act. This person's really, really smart. They know that Teddy Roosevelt's a trust buster, and they know that Wilson's going to go a step further. So this is how they're going to get not only evidence beyond the documents, this can possibly even be their deep analysis point. Clayton Antitrust Act, which helped labor unions rather than harm them, like the Sherman Antitrust Act. The enactment of the Wisconsin Plan in California, this is also evidence beyond the documents, folks. We read about this. We talked about it in class for a few minutes, but I don't know how many of you remember the Wisconsin Plan because I only said it very briefly. This is also outside the documents, I believe. Oh, okay. No, I'm wrong. This one is document 4. He's talking about the recall and referendum. I got all excited. I was like, oh my gosh, this person's so smart. Oh, they are smart, but this is also in the document. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. The enactment of the Wisconsin Plan in California by Governor Johnson also showed that politically, governments were becoming more democratic. That's part of their thesis, guys. Remember, they are saying, it's set up here right in their thesis. You've got to read it and read it again. Democratized state governments. Further democratized. Hopefully I'm not losing you. Further democratized state government. That's what they said. And here they proved it's true. Adding a recall and a referendum, guys, that further democratizes state governments, and they proved it with document number 4. The government's also increased involvement in business by beginning to side with labor unions, by banning yellow dog contracts. That's a very, very specific piece of information. Wow, this person knows their stuff. Let's move on to the next paragraph. Socially, the government also became more liberal by reforming and allowing, I think it says allowing. I can't even read that word. Blank women in their political quest, as well as reforms to the food and drug industry. Remember, guys, we read parts of Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. That could be part of it. It would be better if they mentioned the Pure Food and Drug Act right there. But yeah, the biggest change in American society was the emergence of the debate over temperance. There we go, document 7. They properly interpreted that. Women began to fight for temperance and form groups such as the Women's Christian Temperance Union and Anti-Saloon League to combat the wets. Remember, the wets are the people who are not in favor of prohibition. The government sided by women by passing the 18th Amendment and the Volstead Act. This, coupled with the passing of the 19th Amendment, which is the one giving women the right to vote, shows how the government was also socially changing because it was passing reforms, many pertaining to women. Guys, that's what is really making theirs good right here. They're showing the connections and the change over time. It shows how the government was socially changing. This supports their thesis statement. Shows how the government was socially changing. Furthermore, the government also aided with the, oh man, I can't even read that word either. What does that word say? Corruption, also aided with the corruption that infected major northern cities by the way of political bosses. The workers in Jane Addams' Hull House, which sought to educate immigrants, brought the corruption to the eyes of the government. Document 1. Not only did Jane Addams bring attention to these issues, but so did authors such as Jacob Riis. Oh, you guys remember Jacob Riis, How the Other Half Lives? That's also not found in these documents. There's more evidence outside the documents. They're connecting kind of muckraking journalism or investigative reporting to this bringing attention to the issues. Hey, if there's an issue with political corruption, we need people to kind of investigate this and highlight it in a journalistic way so that people can know. The state governments and organizations were also influenced by the political changes that occurred during the era. Arguments about the role of government in regards to juvenile courts began to rise, and lawyers such as Julian Mack argued for states to act as protectors, not as punishers. That's what Source 3 is all about, guys. They're trying to help you understand that the progressives are going to change the way government works. And remember, even in their thesis statement, they said that social changes include political, government involvement, temperance, abolition, and food. I was hoping they had something about I thought their thesis statement had something more specific about children in court. I guess they mentioned that in a different spot. Okay, let's just keep going down. I thought it was there. Last sentences, last paragraphs on this. However, as much as there was political change occurring, most of it was controlled by white middle-class women. Thus, most changes involved them. That's why reforms for Native Americans and African Americans were virtually non-existent. Like seen in Document 5, changes actually retrograded, with Wilson segregating government offices instead of further segregating them. Thus countered the progressive era and highlighted the flaws of the era. That's good. That's what their thesis is about, guys. In their thesis statement, they mention that the progressives are not going to fully address African Americans really at all. They prove that that's true with this use of document. Furthermore, while the U.S. was reaping the benefits of a politically liberal government, U.S. foreign policy seemed to be based on exploiting other countries. The annexation of Hawaii under McKinley, suppression of self-determination in the Philippines. So, folks, this is how they're trying to get their analysis point. They are saying, while the United States government is doing these liberal things at home, trying to provide for more democracy, they're certainly not doing that abroad. So this is how they're going to get their analysis point down there at the end. This is showing some nuance. Policies of the government are acting very benevolent here. Government's trying to help people in their lives and make their lives better on a daily basis, promote more democracy in America here. But all the while, these same progressives that are doing this at home, look at what they're doing in the Philippines and abroad. That's their point, basically. Cool. That one was okay. I'm really surprised that one got a 7, but that one did. I guess I would have, there's a few things that I didn't love on it, but again, according to this source, or not this source, but this form, that one's a 7, folks. Let's read another one real quick before we go. Let's read this one. Let's read the 2. No, let's read the 5, actually. Let's read the 5. I want you guys to go to page 20. It's 1B, and this will be the last one we do. We'll just do this for like 10 minutes, and then we'll end. I don't know if this was helpful or not for you guys. Sometimes when I'm doing so much talking, I don't know if it is or not. But let's try this one, and then I'll get your feedback, and then we'll go from there. If this was only kind of helpful, we'll get your feedback in a minute, and we'll see how we can improve for next time. So let's read this one. We won't do much analysis on it, guys. Let's just kind of read it and see how it flows holistically. I think when I stop so much in the middle of reading an essay, it sometimes gets hard to track its flow. I don't know if that hurts you or helps you, but let's look at this one in one solid piece and see what we think. Between 1890 and 1920, vast political changes took place in America. Prior to this time period, manifest destiny and westward expansion had taken place. Immigrants like the Irish, German, and Chinese had come to America. The Industrial Revolution had been taking place with new technology and transportation systems. The Transcontinental Railroad was built, telegrams, telephones, Thomas Edison's light bulb, and the rise of cities were all part of this revolution. However, with everything that is good comes a darker side. Cities were full of crime and violence, were incredibly unsanitary, and were full of slums. Child labor and unsafe working conditions were prevalent, and there was hardly any government intervention concerning this corruption. That's great context so far. Politics and government were controlled and run by political machines and political bosses like William Tweed. Big business ran rampant and unchecked, and people were looking for a leader and government that would help them. That's a lot of context, way more than they need, but that's good. The progressive movement from 1890 to 1920 fostered extensive political change and reform through trust busting and big business regulation, supporting moral and civil rights reform, and helping to eliminate political corruption by returning power to the people. I think that's a good thesis. I actually like this more than the first thesis. It sounds more simple to me, but this is good. Let's read the thesis one more time. The progressive movement from 1890 to 1920 fostered extensive political change and reform through trust busting and big business regulation, supporting moral and civil rights reform, and helping to eliminate political corruption by returning power to the people. Let's see if they've proved it, and let's see if they used a bunch of documents. Theodore Roosevelt was one of the most progressive presidents, and as a president not endorsed or controlled by a political machine, he was exactly what the country needed to reel in the corruption. You don't need to write that. That's extra. Roosevelt was known as a trust buster. He is famous for using the Sherman Antitrust Act to break up Northern Securities as a railroad monopoly. Document 2. Okay, they've used it. Roosevelt talks about the need to possess the power of regulation and that there is clearly a need of supervision. Good. Roosevelt and other progressive presidents like Taft and Wilson would use the government to break up monopolies, trusts, as well as put regulations on big business. Good. I think that is one document used properly. It supports their claim. The progressive era was a time of great moral reform. The image of 7 depicts the sadness and evil that alcohol and saloons bring to women and children. In this time period, the 18th Amendment will be passed prohibiting the sale of alcohol. However, organized crime would soon emerge, and eventually the amendment would be repealed. Not only do they use it correctly, it supports their thesis about moral reform, and I think it shows pretty good analysis that saying it leads to organized crime and eventually is going to be repealed. Prohibition movement was a continuation of the temperance movement that arose in the Second Great Awakening. Oh, good. That could also be considered good analysis. People had always been trying to get rid of the evils of alcohol. Okay. The civil rights movement gained a lot of ground during this era. W.E.B. Du Bois had founded the NAACP and was helping with the more radical push for racial equality. In Document 5, NAACP writes to President Wilson in regards to policy showing that the segregation of the colored employees of the Department of Washington. African Americans were going to be gained some ground, and progressive presidents were often willing to hear them out. Theodore Roosevelt and even invited. So, guys, they're totally wrong. They've misused Document 5 totally. This is why this is not a perfect DBQ. This person's pretty smart and they write really well, but they totally misunderstood Document 5, and it doesn't support their thesis at all. They said that the progressive era was, a time of change in a positive way for African Americans, but we know that's not true. It's actually a step backwards. There's more segregation passed by progressives than there is prior, so they just didn't use 5 right. In terms of political corruption and city reform, the role of politics increased drastically. Document 4 details a new policy of referendum, initiative, and recall. These new municipal rights reforms give to the electorate the power of action when desired. They're quoting Document 4. These policies were in response to the corruption. So they've kind of summarized it. What they've done so far is they've summarized Document 4. Now let's see if they analyze it in a way that helps their claim. These policies were in response to the corruption of state and national governments by political bosses. Yes, they did. The citizens of the states would now could now propose new legislation, that's the referendum, vote, and even recall elected officials. That's great. They use that one perfectly. In terms of crime, Document 3 talks about the juvenile court, not treating juveniles like criminals, but worthy citizens. Good. These people need to be checked physically and mentally with all the facts discussed before being treated like a criminal. Good. They've used that one properly. So that's Document 3 used properly. That is Document 4 properly, not 5. Document 7. Document 2. I've got them with 4 properly used documents so far. 4 properly used documents. Okay. Police departments were trained and instated in cities due to the violent crime rates. These tax-paid police forces were created to maintain law and order, something that governments had previously turned a blind eye towards. I don't know if I buy that. I just think that's kind of inaccurate. Also, in terms of city reform of the institutions, so they're talking about the reform of the police department, guys, but I don't think they use Document 6 properly. I'm not counting it. They just literally say police departments were trained in cities due to violent crime, but there's nothing about the reform of them making them more efficient here. So I don't buy it. I'm not counting document 6. I've still got them at 4 documents. 5 didn't work, 6 didn't work. These places were usually, okay, here, so they're talking about social settlements down here. Also in terms of city reform or the institutions of settlement houses. These places were usually for new immigrants or people from the city to find necessary help and services while getting settled. Most famous was Jane Addams and Hull House. Guys, they used document 1 wrong. Even though what they said is accurate about settlement houses, that is not at all what document 1 says. That was what people who know what Jane Addams, who she is, do, who don't read the document. They see she's the author of the source and they instantly start describing Hull House. Don't do that on that one. You've got to read the document. So even though they know what social settlements are, they did not use document 1 appropriately. They've botched 3 out of 7 documents, guys. They botched 1, they botched 6 about police departments, and they botched 5 about the NAACP. They've only got 4 out of 7 documents. To conclude, the Progressive Era fostered massive political change through various reforms of big business, cities, and morals. The Progressive Era marked the start when the federal government would have an ever-increasing role in the lives of Americans. Progressive President Roosevelt was famous for his big stick diplomacy and intervention in Latin American affairs. Today, I don't know if that's important. Today, President Trump employs similar tactics in dealing with North Korea, China, and foreign trade. You could argue that that's accurate. I don't think that's a critique of the president. It definitely is accurate to say that President Trump wants to use some kind of like big stick diplomacy in the way that Teddy Roosevelt would. I buy that. Overall, the Progressive Era would create great political change that still continues to influence America. I think that essay is really good. They didn't use all the documents appropriately. They could have probably had the viewpoints, the sources, the sourcing of the documents a little bit better, guys, but that's great. I'm going to wrap it up because you've already had me for 35 minutes, but I just wanted to show you guys, if you want it, we've now read the first 2. We read the 7 and we read the 5, the one that got full credit and the one that just missed a few. Down here, guys, they now go into depth, and I told you what I thought about them. Now College Board tells you what they think about them. So those of you that really, really want to do well, I encourage you to spend a couple more minutes in reading through these explanations. Maybe even go back and reread them and compare them again. So you've got all of these explanations for not only the two DBQs we read, but there's a third one up there as well. So, all right, folks, give me some feedback. Was that helpful at all?
Yeah, that was really helpful.
Anyone else have any thoughts? I feel like I'm just reading too much. I'm trying to go through it, but maybe that's just part of it, and it requires reading and a little discussion. If I'm ever not making sense, guys, I want you to cut me off if you have any ideas on how to be more efficient. But I think the best thing to do is just keep reading examples that students wrote. Thoughts? Thank you, Logan. Logan agrees. Logan concurs. All right, guys. So was this helpful enough that I should do this again tomorrow?
Yeah.
All right. I got a couple responses. All right, guys. So we'll do this again tomorrow with a different DBQ. Obviously, you haven't written it yet. Well, let's real quick while I got you on here. Let's go back and see while you're listening. Let's see how many people did the last practice DBQ. In third period, 10 people did it out of 37 in third. Better than I thought. In fourth period, 6 people out of 33 did it in fourth. What about sixth period? In sixth period, I had 3 people out of 28 do it. Sixth period always is my low turnout period. And let's see what about seventh. Seventh period, I had 11 out of 34 do it. So as always, third and seventh are my highest turnouts. That's pretty good. I had out of 100, I mean, I guess it's not great, but out of 155 of you, I guess I had about 40 of you do it. So whatever. Cool, guys. Well, tomorrow evening, I'm not sure what timing yet, but I'll figure it out and let you know tomorrow. But I'll do an afternoon or evening live session again for any of you that want to join. I'll pull up another DBQ that I've got student answers for, and we'll go through it. So My words might not always be that helpful, but I'm thinking that if we just keep reading a crap load of responses and sample DBQs, that'll work. Even though the rubric is slightly modified, folks, don't worry. All the information is basically the same. Keep using outside evidence. Keep trying to do the sourcing, meaning the viewpoint of document 2 can be seen as supporting blah, blah, blah. The historical context of this document can be seen as supporting blank. Just go with their bread and butter strategies that you've been doing all year for these, and you're going to be just fine. So I'll take any questions that you might have. Otherwise, I'm going to sign off. Any questions, folks? Oh, Tay. Stop recording.